I'm going to call to order this January 15th meeting of the Edina Transportation Commission, and we'll start with roll call.
Chair Bass.
Here.
Member Betke.
Here.
Member Campbell. Member Iyer.
Here.
Member Janovi.
Here.
Member LaForce.
Here.
Member Nelson.
Here.
Member Olson. Member Rummel.
Here.
Member Spanicky.
Here.
Member Whited.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to approval of the meeting agenda. Does anyone have any changes to offer to the agenda other than me? Okay, I do have one item. I am going to move that we. Do I make a motion? I'm going to ask that we table item D under reports and recommendations. The Edina Challenge Transportation Options Subcommittee table that to February's agenda because our group has not had a chance to meet yet.
I'll second your motion to change the agenda.
All in favor of modifying or tabling that item to a future agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Okay, motion carries. Any other changes? Okay. We have a motion to approve the agenda as a. Did we just approve it? We just approved it. Okay, good. Okay, so then we will move on to approval of the minutes. Any edits or changes to the minutes?
Yeah,
We did?
I don't know. On page, I have one.
Okay, great.
Or two, I guess. Tell them what page is that?
Page 3, 2/3 of the way.
Okay, on page 3, it says that I volunteered for the survey committee, and I don't remember volunteering. So, strike my name. And then on page 4, the second paragraph under chair and commission member comments, midway in that paragraph, it says, she said she does not want to accept the current financial restraint. And can that be modified to say something like, she said that the current financial restraint is not the only way to look at it? I think that would be clearer.
Can we have, we're okay to have discussion on the suggested edits, right?
Yeah, you can make it better.
No, I'm actually not going to try to change that one, but I do think that you volunteered for that committee because there would have been 3 people. Commissioner
really?
LaForce, do you have a
My
recollection of that?
No, I didn't think she did either.
No?
Because I hadn't.
So it was
just Siri and I met and
Oh,
talked,
okay.
and I thought, I forgot. I read this and I forgot Jennifer. So
Okay.
I checked with her to see. if
Never
she,
mind then.
you know.
I take your edit.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of edits. One on page 2. I think the second sentence, let's see, it says go down to about the middle of the page where it says member Bass, and then it said, she said what Edina Challenge wants to do is not comprehensive enough. I think that captures what I said, but I think what I was trying to get at, it's not that what they want to do is not comprehensive enough. It will solve their problem, but that it's a one slice of a bigger problem in the city, I think is what I was trying to say. So if we could modify it to read, she said what Edina Challenge wants to do is one slice of a bigger problem in the city, or a larger challenge in the city. Does that make sense? Okay. And then on page 4, where let's see, second paragraph from the bottom, where we're talking about the Greater Southdale study, if folks are comfortable, I'd like to add, I remember us we talked about not wanting to cut off connectivity of the streets, but also provided a kind of a rationale for that, and if folks are comfortable, I'd like to add a sentence that says something to the effect of, a grid layout has been shown through research to aid walkability. That, like, there's a reason for not wanting to cut off connectivity. And then finally on page 4, on the last paragraph, second to last sentence, Chair Bass said they could recommend, I'd like to add to council, that staff realign the road or look at the possibility of including the sidewalk. Recommend to council. And that's it from me. Any other edits? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the edits or minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second? Second. Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes as amended? Aye. Aye. Nays? Motion carries. Okay, community comment. Do we have anyone in the audience who'd like to address the commission? We welcome you to do that. Anyone? Aside from the presentation, Mr. Waljasper? Oh, okay. Hang on one second then. This is a time when we take comments from we invite residents to come up and talk. If at any point in the future you have a transportation issue you'd like to come and talk with us about, we welcome that. But as it stands, enjoy the meeting. Okay. So we'll move on from community comment and start with reports and recommendations. We have Mr. Jay Waljasper here to talk with us about, Mr. Waljasper is a journalist and a writer and has been doing some work documenting efforts around the country called Vision Zero. And I invited him here tonight to hear a little bit more about what his research has uncovered and share what's been going on in other communities across the country. And I don't know if Mr. Nolan will be pulling up some visuals here, but welcome to our meeting, Mr. Waljasper.
Okay, sure. Okay. All right. I think, can everybody, do you guys have access to the?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
we see it in front of us here.
In some way, Vision Zero is I think, a really fresh idea, just simply how to make our streets safer. It's safer for everyone involved, the people who drive there, the people who walk there, the people who have disabilities and who roll down the streets and the sidewalks. And it certainly is always terrifying in the wintertime to see someone, in their motorized chair, sidewalks aren't plowed and something like that, and they're just going down the middle of the street. I mean, they have much more bravery than I would in that case. So, but in any case, I think this is from neighborhood in Stonington, Connecticut, and I think it sort of just sums up pretty well what the vision is, really ought to be for our communities, and certainly for Vision Zero. We think our town is heaven. Please don't drive like hell through it. So anyway, I'm going to look particularly at Vision Zero from the perspective of the pedestrian, because everybody in Edina is a pedestrian at some point during the day, and they're the most vulnerable users, and they tend to be the people that are the poorest people in the community, the oldest people in the community, the youngest people in the community. But really, Vision Zero really is kind of a win-win-win. It makes things better for everyone. So anyway, and again, my name is Jay Waljasper. I'm a writer and a consultant on how to make better communities, and I do quite a bit of research around the country and really around the world looking at what are kind of positive ideas. So Vision Zero is a very exciting idea. More than 4,500 pedestrians are killed by motor vehicles every year on the streets of America, more than those who died in the horror of 9/11. Another 68,000 walkers on average are injured every year. The victims are disproportionately children, seniors, and people of color. Unfortunately, pedestrian deaths and all traffic fatalities are viewed as an inevitable side effect of modern life. People accept this as normal, just as 100 years ago most people accepted that women could not vote, observes Gil Penalosa, executive director of 880 Cities, an international organization working to make streets safe for people of all ages. Did anyone get to see Gil when he was here last spring? He did an amazing, 17 presentations over 6 days all around the Twin Cities metro area, and got people excited about the idea of how to make our 880 cities, which are just that the streets ought to be safe enough you could send your 8-year-old son or your 80-year-old grandmother out on the streets. Yet recent history offers some genuine hope for making our streets safer. A generation ago, domestic abuse and drunk driving were seen as sad, unalterable facts of human nature. But vigorous public campaigns to prevent these tragedies have shown remarkable results, offering clear evidence that destructive human behavior can be curbed when we put our minds to it. So today, campaigns to reduce pedestrian, bicyclist, and motorist deaths to zero are now taking shape around the country, from Philadelphia to Chicago to Oregon. This new safety strategy, called Vision Zero, is modeled on successful efforts in Sweden, where overall traffic deaths have been cut in half, 50%, since 2000, making Swedish streets the safest in the world, according to a front-page story in the New York Times. And pedestrian deaths have plummeted in Sweden at the same time, at the same rate, 50%. And that's just really over the last 15 years. The Economist magazine, and The Economist magazine is known, as if anyone's familiar with it, is a very conservative, not a kind of a crazy radical magazine. But The Economist reports that Sweden accomplished all this by emphasizing safety over speed in road design. The influential conservative Newsweekly cites improved crosswalks, lower urban speed limits, pedestrian zones, barriers separating cars from bikes and pedestrians, and narrowing streets for the impressive drop in traffic deaths. Sweden takes a far different approach than conventional transportation planning, where road users are held responsible for their own safety, according to the website Vision Zero Initiative. And you can just Google that if you're interested in more information. Swedish policy, by contrast, believes that to save lives, roads must anticipate driver, pedestrian, and walker errors, based on the simple fact that we are human and we make mistakes. This is very similar to the Netherlands' policy of forgiving roads, which has reduced traffic fatalities by 75% since the 1970s, compared to less than a 20% reduction in the U.S. over the same period. Basically, the Dutch have just focused on how you make everybody safer on the roads, and we essentially just tried to kind of remove the pedestrians from the roads. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio won office last year on the promise of reducing traffic deaths in a city where someone is killed or seriously injured by a motor vehicle every 2 hours on average. Traffic accidents are the largest preventable cause of death for children under 14 in New York, and the second highest source of fatal injuries for people over 65. So last May, New York City Council, in a flurry of activity, passed 11 bills and 6 resolutions to implement the Vision Zero action plan. And so New York is really the leader in the United States right now. Some of the legislation involved increased police enforcement for speeding, failure to yield to pedestrians, and dangerous driving. And it's interesting because the failure to yield to pedestrians is illegal almost everywhere, and is hardly ever enforced as a law. A campaign, they went to the state legislature to get permission to lower speed limits in the city to 25 miles per hour, and on some streets to 20 miles per hour. That's something they've done in Seattle, too, to good effect. They use safety improvements like traffic calming, speed cameras, and slow zones on streets. And they added a street safety curriculum in the schools. And that's interesting, something the Netherlands does. Every 4th grader in the entire country gets an intensive education about walking safely, biking safely, and also driving safely. And again, in the city of Utrecht, they have a little, it's almost like a little theme park where the kids get to pretend they're in cars or pretend they're on bikes, or I guess they're on bikes, and stuff like that. And so it's really, it's just something it's a basic, fundamental thing that kids need to know. San Francisco is probably second in the country right now in Vision Zero. And last year they saw a near record high of 25 pedestrian and bike fatalities, and so that's moved people into action. The San Francisco School District and more than 2 dozen community organizations recently launched a campaign to encourage city officials to fix dangerous intersections and streets, ensure full and fair enforcement of traffic laws with an emphasis on curbing dangerous behavior, invest in training and education for all road users, focusing on helping frequent drivers, and those are truck drivers and taxi drivers generally, share the road with walkers and bicyclists. And their ultimate goal is to eliminate all traffic deaths in the city by 2024. After these plans were announced, they were endorsed by the San Francisco Police Department. The gravest danger to walkers, as well as bicyclists and motorists, are other motorists who drive dangerously. According to data collected by the New York City Department of Transportation from 2008 to 2012, dangerous driver choices contributes to pedestrian deaths in 70% of the cases. Dangerous pedestrian choices is responsible in 30% of the cases, and joint responsibility in 17% of cases. As the old saying go, when it comes to the streets, speed kills. 2 landmark studies, one from the US and one from the UK, found that pedestrians are killed 5% of the time when struck by a car traveling 20 miles per hour, 37 to 45% of the time when struck by a car traveling 30 miles per hour, and 83 to 85% of the time when struck by a car traveling 40 miles per hour. In light of these findings, it's scary to realize that traffic on many, if not most, American roads travels closer to 40 miles per hour than to 20 miles per hour. Many experts think it's not the easiest thing. Just changing the speed limits is not enough. It takes a whole range of different opportunities just to kind of make the streets safer. But it really begins, I think, Vision Zero, the most important part of it, is just simply that it's a commitment to say that any death that happens on the streets of Edina or any other community, whether it's a pedestrian, whether it's a bicyclist, or whether it's someone in a motor vehicle, is just one death too many. And this is not just the cover charge for living in a modern society, that we can actually do something about it, just as was done with drunk driving, just as was done with domestic abuse. So anyway, that's I was just going to run through a few. It's always nice to have some photos. So this is the gentleman who's been through speaking in the Twin Cities a couple times. His name is David Engwicht. He's sort of the person who popularized traffic calming around the world. And he's an interesting, he's a character. And so he travels around the world with his portable throne, which folds up to the size of a suitcase so he can carry it on a plane with him. And he sets it up in some heavily trafficked street somewhere to drive home the point that cars are not the king of the road. And so I think that's just an interesting thought to keep in mind. Vision Zero, there is a real vision that goes along with it. And part of it is just a vision of having, safer streets, but also just having better streets. When you have a place that's pedestrian friendly, you have a place that looks like this. It's something where you wouldn't mind whiling away the afternoon on that block, just kind of seeing what's going on. This is very interesting. It's in New Haven, Connecticut, and at one time in this neighborhood, the occupancy rate was 5%. They had narrowed the street, widened the street, narrowed the sidewalks, and basically the life just left the neighborhood. They put the sidewalks back to where they were before, and suddenly there was a revival. The biggest losers in our transportation system right now are old people and young people. They're oftentimes under a form of kind of house arrest when they're not able to walk safely from place to place. This woman is lucky enough, she lives in Paris, which is at least her neighborhood is a pretty friendly pedestrian environment. You can see that she takes her 2 canes to be able to walk around, and yet she's able to do her shopping. So she's fortunate, but unfortunately people in a lot of American cities at that age don't have that opportunity. And, of course, kids. I mean, it's we sometimes just, when we're thinking about transportation, we just don't think about how a kid's going to cross the street. I think one of the great assets of having people on foot is just that people who wouldn't otherwise know one another get to know one another. This is a scene taken in Brooklyn, and this is a Hasidic Jewish family and an African-American family. This was actually at a time when there was quite a bit of tension between those 2 communities in New York City. And yet, there they are walking side by side down the street. Just people walking together is just a great way to make those connections that make a community vital. Also, when you have a great pedestrian environment, a safe pedestrian environment fosters a great pedestrian environment, you suddenly have street life. This is in Buenos Aires, actually, but I mean, who wouldn't want to be there in kind of one of those lounge chairs and sitting around having a drink and just watching the world go by? And this is the real reason to do anything like this. It's just simply so that our kids can feel like the streets belong to them too. So anyway, thank you very much for entertaining these ideas. Do you do question answering? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming in and sharing what you've learned about these initiatives around the country and the world, really. And at this point, I'd like to see if any of my fellow commissioners have questions or comments about what you've heard. Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you very much, Mr. Wall Jasper. That was very interesting to hear. So the examples that you talked about tend to be some of the bigger cities. I was interested to know if there were cities that are comparable to Edina. I mean, even you started with examples in Sweden. I wonder if there's towns with similar population densities. And the second part of my question would be that, what would be, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but what would be the one or two things that you would recommend that
Sure.
the city of Edina consider?
Yeah, actually, there's a big initiative going on throughout the state of Oregon as well, and I think the bigger cities, the problems are more acute, and that's probably why, and particularly New York City being the place where where the number, more. This is the first time in decades, more people were injured and were killed, in traffic crimes last year than were killed were murdered. So that's something, that gets people's attention. But throughout Oregon, cities, suburbs, and small towns are involved in it as well. And of course, the Swedish and the Dutch examples are on the national level. So, virtually every Dutch and Swedish city has embraced some of these things. It's made a difference. In terms of just some of the specifics, and I was trying to keep my presentation shorter, but it's, kind of common sense, a lot of them. Road diets, which is taking a 4-lane street and turning it into kind of a 3-lane street that, functions just as well because of the center turn lanes. That's a great way to make the streets safer and to move toward the Vision Zero. Reducing the width of travel lanes, reducing the length of crosswalks, oftentimes by what's called ball bounce, just kind of making, when people have to spend less time in the street, it's safer for them. That's just sort of obvious. A big one that has a huge effect are when you have a busy street, putting a median island in the middle, so there's almost, you can get halfway across the street at least, and without interfering. Making crosswalks more visible, just simply, sometimes painting them. In Europe, they paint them kind of a very dark blue. But just anything, really anything in the roadway that can remind a motorist, and we're all drivers at some point during the day, if we're over 16 probably, and I advocate for these things all the time, but sometimes I get in a car and every signal that you get is that the road belongs to you, and you suddenly, what's that bike doing there? What's that pedestrian doing there? And so just any way that we can design the experience of the street so that it's not like some kind of shock when someone is crossing the street in front of you. And so, do it with paint, do it with signs, do it with engineering, but just simply send everybody a message that the street really belongs to everyone, and keep an eye out for all different kinds of users. I always like to think that all these measures are a little bit sort of a law and order campaign, because we're essentially trying to make it easier for people to obey the law, to obey the speed limits, and that creates safer streets for everyone. And the interesting thing is, what's good for the pedestrian, what's good for the bicyclist is also what's good and safe for the motorist as well. So they're really, this is a hard issue to be on the other side of.
Mm-hmm. Any questions down this way?
Yeah.
Thanks. Just changing attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ways that, besides enforcement and, changes to the infrastructure, what are some of the ways that the initiative is trying to change attitudes?
Well, it's a little bit, getting kids in the schools, and that's really where where you can impact the future the most, by getting young people changing their thing. It's interesting. There's a lot of things that affect trees with streets with trees on them. People tend to drive slower on those streets. The more that there's something interesting to sort of look at as you drive down the street, the slower that you'll go. The streets that you're just driving past, the big parking lots in front of big box stores, those are the streets that you'll drive the fastest on. So that's kind of almost like a mental attitude. The guy that I showed you sitting in the throne in the middle of the Champs-Élysées, he's kind of gone from advocating engineering changes to kind of advocating these kind of mental changes, which is just simply, just getting people to sort of have a consciousness that the street really does belong to everybody. Through history, the street was the place where children played and where old people gossiped and where, young people flirted. And, it's really only been maybe the last, depending on where you're at, the last 40 to 90 years where the street became kind of the exclusive domain of the cars. It used to be that's where dogs took their naps. I one time was lucky enough to go to Mexico and ended up in this sort of village up in the mountains, and still, the dogs still sleep in the middle of the road there because there aren't that many cars. And so it's that thinking about the street belonging to all of us, I think, would be the one mental mantra that I would, that I think goes the farthest. And just, anyway, that point that became driven home, something like a public art project, can give people a sense that, just to kind of take a different view of our streets.
Mr. Genevieve?
Thank you for being here. I've bumped into your articles many times in different
okay.
places online.
Okay.
So sometimes people, when we propose a pedestrian improvement, will come back and say, well, how many pedestrians have been killed?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with that? I mean, we're so fortunate in Edina that that's, not happening.
Yeah.
Has not happened in many years that I can remember. But what do you say? I mean, to me, you don't wait until something happens to do something.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do you tell people?
Well, and the question might be, too, that, there's a couple different ways to reduce pedestrian deaths. And one of them, which is just to simply create an environment which people, unless they're really fanatical about walking, won't walk. And so no pedestrian deaths because there's very few pedestrians. I mean, so that's something to look at if that's sort of the situation. If there's a way to measure near misses, if there's a way to measure, people who are injured. I mean, 68,000 people every year are injured, pedestrians. So something like that. But it is, inevitably something's going to happen. It'd be really great to not have some awful, horrible story that becomes the nucleus of an effort to do something about it. But it is hard to say, if it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of situation like that. But just, if you look at the sidewalks and they're kind of empty on a beautiful April afternoon where it's 65 degrees for the first time in 5 months, then, there's something wrong. And, that people, or maybe a survey, just would people walk more if they felt safer in the streets? One of the things, the big push behind protected bike lanes has been done because they did a survey and 65% of all Americans say they would bike more if they felt safe and they had a place to bike that wasn't, didn't feel like they were threatened by traffic. And I would suspect it's somewhat similar for pedestrians as well.
Anyone else with questions or comments? Okay. Well, I would just want to thank you again for coming in and sharing what you've learned in your work and your writings. And I think part of the reason that I wanted to have you come in and talk with us and share this information, with the rest of the community as well. What I love about the idea of Vision Zero, I think you said it earlier, that perhaps the most important thing about it is that you make a commitment, a public commitment, to say that any traffic death is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And, I would even extend it further to say that, any injury is unacceptable. I mean, I think that that's within our power to affect. And I think many of the things that you named in terms of engineering changes, the city has started to implement already. But one thing that we sort of haven't come together on is putting forward an ambitious vision for why we are doing these things. And to me, a huge piece of it is this element of safety. That it's unacceptable to have motorist or bicyclist or pedestrian deaths, and to me, it's unacceptable to have injuries as well. And when we know what to do to change that, then we should make a concerted effort as a community to do it.
And think what a great gift to the children of Edina that if they could actually, their range of transportation could be widened. Maybe they could go down to the store and get some candy. Maybe they could get over to the park without someone driving. That's the ultimate, I think, payoff for all of this. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on then to item B, under reports and recommendations. It's the 2014 bicycle and pedestrian count results, and I will turn it over to Planner Nolan. Or no, I won't.
No, that's okay. I'll introduce Joe.
Okay, great.
Wanted to, in presenting the efforts to count bikes and pedestrians last year, I wanted to take advantage of that and give the opportunity to introduce the ETC to Joe Totten, who's our traffic safety coordinator. Joe, I think you've been with us for the better part of a year. Is that right? And Joe's the one who's behind the traffic safety committee reports and does all the organizing and all the data gathering and everything else. And Joe was really behind the effort to put these bike and ped counts together. So I'll turn it over to him.
Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for having me. Essentially what this presentation is going to do is it's meant to inform both you and the general public overall about the counts that we did. We're going to be covering why we counted, how we did it, what we do and did not count, where we counted, what we can learn, and how we, as the engineering department at least, view this going forward and being useful. So to start with why we count is that we need, for transportation planning, it's important to know where people are, where they're going, and what facilities that they're using. And then with health as well, sometimes when you just think about transportation planning, you would only think about people who are necessarily going from point A to point B, but just getting out and walking even if it's walking to the store, to the park, or around the block is good exercise and can help benefit public health. So counting for those reasons as well captures recreation into the mission here and allows us to use that. And then finally for us is the ability to evaluate improvements. And so when we add in a bike lane or when we add in a sidewalk, how does that actually affect how many people use our facilities, how many people are out walking and biking in Edina? Otherwise, this was part of a larger statewide study that has a great little video that did not play. Does the link work? The link? Yes. The link, okay.
People love to walk and bike for relaxation, for exercise, to get places like school, work, and stores. The benefits are numerous: improved health, cost savings, and smaller carbon footprints. In fact, Minnesota has become a leader in non-motorized transportation. Biking and walking have increased significantly in the Twin Cities metro area during the past decade, and these activities are catching fire statewide.
And increasingly we see with the grand challenges society faces, climate change, public health, that encouraging active travel, bicycle trips, makes sense.
U of M researchers have partnered with MnDOT, the Minnesota Department of Health, and several other state and local agencies to measure bicycle and pedestrian traffic.
It really comes down to having more information about safety, where to make investments, the economic benefits, and the health impacts of bicycling and walking.
Having those numbers to show that the investments are justified, are being used, is really valuable when talking to council members, when talking to the mayor's office and other decision makers.
The research project developed ways to count and analyze bike and pedestrian traffic using a mix of manual and automated methods. The researchers found that bicycle and pedestrian traffic volumes follow distinct patterns that can be used to estimate non-motorized traffic on city streets, sidewalks, and trails.
We see higher traffic where there are more destinations for people to travel and do things they want to do.
MnDOT is evaluating automated counting methods through a project that will conclude in 2015. The project uses automated technologies for counting bicycles and pedestrians on trails, bike lanes, sidewalks, and shoulders in various urban and rural locations in Minnesota.
The city of Minneapolis has been counting bikes and pedestrians since 2007, so we actually had a pretty good methodology down for doing manual counts. And what Greg and MnDOT were able to do through this project is apply and refine the methodology that Minneapolis had been using to a number of communities throughout Minnesota.
MnDOT also is considering how to incorporate such non-motorized traffic data into its existing traffic database. Researchers recommended that MnDOT coordinate statewide counts and work with local agencies to establish a network of automated monitoring sites across the state.
The idea here is that by establishing networks of permanent counters in conjunction with short duration samples, we can completely characterize a traffic network. That's our goal. That's what we have for vehicles. We don't have it for bikes and pets.
Once this report is completed, we will be going out to communities statewide or having a workshop kind of centrally here where they can come, and we would do a training on how they can install their own equipment, how to collect data, and how to analyze it.
In addition to supporting state goals, this research also is contributing to federal traffic monitoring standards. Such data already are used in cities like Minneapolis and Duluth for planning bike and pedestrian facilities. In Minneapolis, where biking has increased 70% in recent years, counting is now a routine operation for the Public Works Department. The city maintains about 80 miles of trails, which tally an amazing 28 million miles of use per year. Indeed, life is a journey, and Minnesota is fast becoming the place where every step counts.
All right, so while we weren't necessarily part of that exact study, that is our overall goal, is to become and get data for uses such as they were talking about there. So how we count in Edina. In Edina, we do not have any of those automated traffic counters, so we were using manual counts, but we were doing them in a way that is different from what Minneapolis typically does with a lot of their locations. What we did is we used video to analyze our locations. So we would put up a camera, bring it back into the office, and analyze it on a computer there. The advantages to video studies, especially above using volunteers in the field, is that we're able to check the video to make sure that if something looks out of the ordinary, we're able to check it and actually make sure that that's an 11 or is it 2 tally marks that we forgot to erase. We can capture more time, and this is twofold. Not only can we capture longer periods, but we can also capture multiple days easier. So it was a lot easier for us to balance out when we had 2 days that we captured on video, whereas we would have to have coordinated 2 different sets of volunteers to go out in the field otherwise. And then we were also able to get a full 24 hours of data, which gives us a use profile, essentially, of when people are actually out using all of our facilities throughout the city. And then finally, it's easier to manage, and it was easier on us than trying to get 2 volunteers for every site to go out, go for 2 hours, give them a bottle of water, a vest, a chair, a pencil. It just was easier to get all together to just say, we can do it internally. We have some extra intern hours that we can use to especially set up cameras and put this through. So what we did count was the number of pedestrians, bicycles, and assisted pedestrians. So that would be people with canes, wheelchairs, walkers, or kids in strollers. Anybody who was, skateboards is a good example. Anybody who is not using their own 2 feet only as their way of walking, and someone who's also not on a bicycle. We counted these all in 15-minute intervals, and then we tried to divide which ones were adults and which ones were children. Sometimes this got a little difficult. But we, for the most part, did get which ones were adults and which ones were children. What we did not count was vehicle traffic or any vehicle data. This study was not set up to do that. And we also did not count the presented gender of non-motorized users. Large part of this was just simply, it's hard to see from the camera, you're further away from the intersection, and then also the 2 genders was kind of uncomfortable, especially to try and categorize like children. So we decided that it wasn't necessarily needed data for Edina, so we decided to not collect it. So the counts were taken near major pedestrian generators or other places where the data would be useful. So you can see in our 3 northern areas that are in gold there, those are taken for year-to-year comparisons so that we could create charts of the growth and such. And the other ones are predominantly around schools or near where the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail would go, as well as along facilities that we would like to know the usage of. So here comes the fun part. What can we actually learn? And so what is the data telling us? This first chart is somewhat narrow, but it's the non-motorized transportation users from 4 to 6 p.m. at our 3 counts that were in gold on the last chart. 6 counts, 3 locations, because we have, those were all at intersections, so we have 1 on each street. And we can generally see here that non-motorized trips are increasing. This might just be only from 4 to 6. Maybe everyone really likes to get out at 5 to go for a walk, but from 4 to 6, at least, use seems to be increasing. This chart actually is a little different from the one in your handout. I'm sorry, I mislabeled the ones in your handout for Valley View and Brookside. They were switched, but this is mostly the same. This is just the general use, the total use at each location of all of our facilities. And what we can see here is that around schools specifically is very important. These are where a lot of use is being generated, especially around our middle schools and our high schools. The green stars here, we did not get the data for the full 24 hours, but usually that was a camera failure or rain that happened at around 10 at night or around those lines. So losing those 2 hours when no one else was out on our other counts, we decided not to mess with that, not to try and add people in to compensate. Here's the chart that I was talking about with the 24 hours. We can get this use profile. And what we can see here that's really fascinating is that this mirrors transit users and overall vehicular traffic very nicely. It has a lower morning peak and a higher and longer evening peak that lasts for a longer amount of time and has more users. So seeing this really mirrors what we assume for other transportation modes and how they're used as well. And then finally, we have the non-motorized transportation by mode. And in the overall, pedestrians are more common. Some locations and times did not necessarily fit this profile. And if you looked back at the first chart, you could actually see that bikes were almost twice as likely as pedestrians in our counts that we used from year to year from 4 to 6 p.m. So in the future, we will be trying to count these locations as well as any others that might come up. However, the current locations that we would like to keep counting on a yearly basis are the ones that we've been using for our year-to-year comparisons, just so that we can continue that chart until we have enough data to actually create one from all of our locations. The other 4 locations we would like to do every other year, and this would be a way just to simply lower the workload and make it manageable. Also, to do more counts, we'd be able to do more counts when we actually have the ability to not count every location every year. And eventually this would allow us to do year-to-year comparisons, but for the time being, we would like to do every other year counts to get us started and going. And then we'd also like to do counts along new facilities as they are planned or built. So thanks for having me.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Totten? Mm-hmm.
I've got 2 questions. One, the video was talking about one of the reasons we count is because policymakers and planners want to be able to answer the question, basically, is it worth the investment? So, I mean, we get these numbers of how many people, but how do we translate that into the answer to that question? Like, is that a lot of people? Is that not very many people? How does that compare to maybe, say, a road that is lightly used? I mean, there's got to be, I think we want to be able to say there are people using this, but the question is always going to be, well, is it enough? And kind of how do you deal with that problem?
Good question. With that, someone will won't always be making that argument. Where I grew up, people were asking, why don't we expand Ford to more lanes in each direction? And that was a very busy road that had 10,000 vehicles a day, and they said, well, we could take out the sidewalk. So it's going to come up, but at the same point, having these numbers themselves, we can start to look at it and we can start to say, if these people were going to the park, how many kids' trips to the park? How much is that worth, taking your kid to the park? If you were to put a dollar amount on it, how much is it worth to you to go to the park with your kid? If you were to drive there, that would cause wear and tear on our roads and also would cost you money. So is it then worth more to walk with your kid or not? And if we can, making those judgments is difficult and is a hard argument to make in either direction. It's either saying that it's not worth it to let you walk to the park with your kid or saying that it is worth it. But at least now we have numbers that we can start to make those arguments and can start to formulate and move forward. And yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that real quickly. I think one of the things we can talk about certainly is that the trend is going up, but the idea that we are collecting this data is so we don't know what the story is going to be, but we want to be able to tell that story. So we're just at the beginning of this effort. Mm-hmm. And so what this hopefully will tell us is obviously we're looking to find out if these investments are worthwhile and are more people using these facilities. And I think what we could do, and just thinking about this right now, is comparing some of this data to similar facilities in other similar communities. That's something that we could do for starters. But obviously Edina is unique. We can't compare our collector bike routes to those in Minneapolis because those have been there for a long time. The population is much more dense. So I think next steps for us would be maybe to look at some peer cities and peer facilities and find out where that compares and then trends over time.
Okay.
I think, as Mr. Totten articulated, it's a value judgment. It's a policy decision where you put your resources. But I would come back to the commission and ask, is it appropriate for us as a community to only serve some of our residents' transportation needs, or do we need to think about everybody? And I think from my perspective, the direction that has been clearly provided to us is that we need to think about planning for and meeting all users' needs, and this data helps us to have better decisions and track the change over time. So, Commissioner Janovy?
I just got one more quick one. In terms of methodology, do you do anything about taking weather into account? So you're out there on a day, 70 and sunny versus a day where, there's howling winds and rain. And
good question. I'm going to turn the mic off. All right. Good question. We do eliminate rain, and if there was ever a day that we saw that just was not having it, a day that was like 50 in the middle of a week of 70s, yes, we did eliminate that day and said, this is not good weather to be out. And so, especially if there was rain in the middle of the day, we took those days out, and we tried to parse down a little bit of how bad the weather was, but as to relate necessarily exactly what the weather was, and if that had any influence on it, say 75 versus 65, we didn't look at that. That data was sent to MnDOT. And so I believe in their research and in their model, they might be trying to solve that, but we did not look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of to what Catherine was just saying, so when you look at the data for Interlock and East of Blake, it's really low, but that's not a good environment for walking or biking, frankly. So, somebody could look at that data and say, you don't need improvements because nobody's walking or biking there. But the data could actually be telling us the opposite. It could be saying this is an area that has people, it has places that, it's proximity to places people want to go, and they're not walking because of a perceived danger in the street. So that's one thing. When did you move from the volunteer counts to the camera counts?
This year was the first year of the camera counts. Previously, we had actually not been running the volunteer counts. Those have been run by Transit for Livable Communities and Bike Walk Twin Cities. And the last one of those that had been done was 2 years ago, I believe, in 2012.
That program had ended. The funding had run out. So I had met with some folks over at TLC and staff from Minneapolis and St. Paul to look at ways to try and utilize some of the volunteers that they have, but they just didn't have as many, and cities like Minneapolis had an established set of people they were using. So we worked with Bloomington Public Health to look at counting with cameras. That's what Richfield did, and Bloomington did as well. So we have 2 cameras of our own, and we borrowed one from Richfield to be able to do all these counts in these locations. So it just seemed for the reasons Joe talked about earlier, a good move for us to be able to plan into the future and have some reliable data.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yeah, what was the, and maybe you covered this, but what was the duration of each location? How long did you?
We attempted for 24 hours in each location, and wherever the cameras lasted for a full 48 hours, we ended up counting for the full 48. In the locations that were starred on that one chart, they were cut short. I believe 9 to 10 p.m. was when rain came in on those locations, and then also at Interlaken, it did not. The camera, we programmed it, and we didn't quite get it right, so it started recording instead of at midnight. It started recording at 5 in the morning, but not many people were out walking in other locations, and as Commissioner Genevieve noted, that is not a location where a lot of people were walking or biking otherwise, so we probably did not miss too many.
I guess the reason I asked about how long, I mean, it's 1 day or 2 days in each location, it sounds like. It appears the yellow are the ones you're going to do every year, and the maroon are ones you're going to do every other year. Is that correct, or did I miss?
In the map?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it just seems like, obviously it's time and energy and resources and whatnot, but, I think going forward, it would be nice to have those at all those locations, especially by the high school or by the schools. And you have one by, well, I guess you don't have them by any of the schools. You have the ones you're going to look at are up near Blake and Interlaken, which is a terrible place to walk. The other one, I can't quite tell what's. Okay, and then the other one is over by the east side of. Is that Wooddale? That 54th and Wooddale. Anyway, I just want to put that out there. It'd be nice to see. Look, maybe if you're only going to do 3, maybe put one in the south of the area, or mix it up a little bit.
Right,
or,
we have
count them all.
we have the freedom to be able to really do whatever we want, based on what fits the needs of the community. Those 3 locations were chosen because we had the data for 3 other years, so it helps us show that trend line. And I think what's interesting even about the Interlaken example is Blake Road is going to be reconstructed as part of the LRT project that's going in, where the city has some interest in that, and so the ability to be able to compare some of that traffic when the light rail comes in and there's a station to the north and people are going to that station. That's one reason Joe mentioned before we selected some locations near where the 9 Mile Creek Trail is going to be too, to be able to track that. So I think what we're doing in kind of alternating years on some of those other locations allows us the ability to count more locations and provide for future newer locations as well. I mean, if we had another camera, we're looking at possibly getting another camera from Bloomington Public Health to have for ourselves, and then we can program ahead of time those days and use the entire month of September perhaps and do counts each week. So we do have the ability to adjust this as we go.
Yeah, no, I think, I'm not saying anything bad about the locations. The one at Blake and Interlaken is just a very dangerous place to walk. So it would be, obviously, improvements are needed in that area. So.
And one thing to note, too, about getting school crowd would be that at 54th and Wooddale, that count is close to the middle school, and a lot of athletic teams were coming by that camera quite often. So, as well as kids that were obviously going to or from school. So it might not be perfect, but it does at least partially fulfill the need.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spakey?
I wondered if using counts where we're putting in improvements, kind of before, after, let's look at the France intersections, to be able to see if there are improving numbers, and if not, do we need to have better communication or training or even more enhancements? Has anything like that been considered as we move forward?
With these counts, I think the big improvement would be 9 Mile Regional Trail as well as some bike lanes or sidewalks that are planned in these locations. But these were also the locations that were counted to MnDOT and to national specs, so we could also add in locations during other times, and as long as we keep the times consistent of first week in June that we're counting, we would probably be able to get a good estimate of how many people are increasing their usage just in those locations.
Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you very much for this presentation. There's a lot of good data here. I'm still confused about how many days the data was collected. This is average over a week, collected for 3 days, or?
The data was collected for 1 to 2 days in each location, but seeing as we only had 2 to 3 cameras, this was over the span of 3 different weeks that we had to put the cameras out over.
Okay, so it's 3 different weeks.
3 different weeks,
2 days
2
each?
days a week.
Each location's only 2 days, and so how do you compare from year to year? Last time was 2011, now it's 2014. How do you compare year to year? Same dates? Same weather?
It's the same weeks of the year that MnDOT assigns for counting is how we compared going back and how we plan on comparing going forward.
That's the same program that Transit for Livable Communities was using in the state. They choose, I believe it's the second Tuesday in September is the day they use, and then the weather day or the alternative is the week following. So,
okay, so
we're trying to stay at least in the same 2 to 3 week period that those other counts are happening.
And are the trends, the trends seem to be going up for mostly bicyclists. Pedestrians seem to be not really. They're kind of flat as far as I can tell. Now, do you guys consider the population growth or decline in population or something as if there are more people, then maybe more people are biking or more people are walking. Is that part of the consideration calculations?
Well, we didn't consider that. These calculations are just the raw counted data, but that's certainly a data set that would be interesting to look at. I mean, population over the past few years has been pretty flat, relatively, hasn't it? If I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I think that would be worthwhile looking at. I think if the population's growing and we're getting more people using the facilities, obviously that's not an argument against putting them in just because the population is growing, and you would expect something like that. I mean, we have more people. It's kind of analogous to Joe and I were talking about how some of the counts were affected by those cross-country teams and that are running through those areas, and we thought, well, should we really include that? Is that something we should include? And we said, well, yes, we should. They're still using the streets. They're out there all the time, and so we left them in.
Yeah.
And that video was really very nice. And are we considering using some of those automated counting methods, at least for bicyclists, if not for pedestrians? I mean, the Internet of Things should allow us to be able to measure how many people are walking, pressure sensors, whatever. So are we trying to do that? Because this just a couple of days in a whole year trying to project the usage seems to be...
I try and occasionally bring up the idea to Chad Milner, our city engineer, of maybe getting an automated counter. But a lot of those counters work best specifically on completely separated trails. So that would then be a question for when we, especially along the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail, if we would be responsible for counting along there, that would be the ideal location to put a counter. Otherwise, we have not seriously considered and budgeted out for long-term counting.
They're looking at technology to be able to do something like like Joe's talking about, but where there are bike lanes. But it's difficult to be able to track some of those cyclists who may not be in the lanes, and so they're using lasers in some locations. And if you saw on that video, in the communities that were contributing to their study, Edina was listed in there, and that's because on Vernon Avenue they're considering putting in a permanent counter on Vernon. The county is. It's down the road a ways, and I don't know much about it, but that's the reason Edina was listed, is for the county system. They're looking at something like that, perhaps on Vernon's bike lanes.
Yeah, and I want to second, thank you. I want to second Member Spanicki's comment that really what is most interesting would be if we make a change, is it improving the usage? And I don't know if any of these examples, the streets that you listed there, if we've made any changes from putting sidewalks or putting crosswalks or whatever it is in those locations. And if we have made a change, it doesn't look like data is showing that anything has changed, which is sort of disappointing. So I don't know. Have we made any changes in all the streets that you guys looked at? Or an improvement, I guess, right?
Yes, these have been, but these have not necessarily been ideal changes that I've known of. For example, we put in the interlocking bike lanes, which we've discussed. They're not really pleasant to bike on. At some points, they go down to 6 inches wide, and in a traffic safety report a few months ago, I believe, we actually recommended removing them and telling bikers to merge with traffic just because it didn't seem as responsible to not give them that instruction. So we're looking forward to some things that can be done. Along 54th Street, I know that advisory bike lane right at Wooddale is being questioned, and we're looking at some other ideas in this as well, but we do not, as far as I know, have much change to our locations that would be high volume.
So I want to conclude with, let me just make one quick final comment, is that and this might be just, speculation, but I think that some of the things that will show real impact are the things that we've been talking about in this commission about really creating a network. So let's just talk about bicycling for the moment. Just having a few bike lanes here, not connected properly, going to certain, destinations or to bigger paths. I think that's where the real impact is going to be, is that we create a network, an overall network more comprehensive than the patchwork that we have to see real impact. Because I think that we've done a lot of things, but nothing has changed, which means that either those changes are not worth it or we're not doing the full network, which is what we should be doing. Thank you.
Commissioner Janovi?
Well, I'm trying to make some of the same sense that Surya is trying to make of this. So my memory, I've been on Bike Edina for a few years. My memory is that the count locations, the one on Interlochen and Brookside 44th, and what was the third one? Wooddale, I think. Those were manual counts that TLC, we participated in the TLC program, and Bike Edina volunteers did that, and then they use a formula to estimate the 24-hour count. So it's a 2-hour manual count, volunteer count, and then they use a formula. So what I'm wondering is, in these numbers here, excuse me, is that the actual count, or is that the count once the formula has been applied? So that would be the data from 2009, 10, and 11. And then one reason it might look like biking is picking up more is that because those locations were specifically chosen because there was already existing bike traffic. And so, improvement or not, the people who were comfortable on that road were already using the road. So, ideally, we would like to expand the opportunity for people who want to bike. So I guess that was my main comment. Do the numbers represent the count when the formula has been applied, or the actual count actual count?
The numbers in that chart reflected the 4 to 6 p.m. counts themselves, the actual counts,
count?
and not the formula applied for a
Okay.
full day.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Genevieve?
No.
Okay. I was going to go back to this graph as well that showed the 4 to 6 p.m. counts and just comment that that from some of our so this on the chart that shows the 4 to 6 p.m. counts, is that only the maroon locations or only the gold locations, or is it all locations?
Those would be only the gold locations.
Only the gold locations.
Yes.
So the annual
Yes.
counts. Okay. Okay. I think it would be useful in the future, or maybe as subsequently, just to send out maybe even by email. I would love to see, although we just have the one data point right now for the other counts, right?
Right. This allows us
Okay.
in the future to be able to do the similar graph for the other locations as we get more
The ones
data.
that are going to be tracked every other year.
Right.
Okay. So can I make a suggestion then for those counts, especially those that were those locations that were identified around schools, especially the middle schools and the high school, a 4 to 6 p.m. count is probably not going to capture a lot of the student traffic. At least right now with the current school schedule, I think there'd probably be a lot more traffic from, like 2 to 4 at those locations. So just going forward, and I think that's great. I like the idea of getting some of them on kind of like a rotating schedule so we can add other locations in. And then eventually, if you look out long term, we'll have data for comparison every other year. But still, I think it'll be a great improvement from what we have right now. And I would just say that, this is what we have in front of us is one snapshot in time. It's a fairly short period of time. And what we're looking for is trends. It's hard to see trends in a very short period of time. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not, what we're doing is not having an impact. We need to be tracking this over time. So unless there are any other questions, I'm going to move us on. Yes, Commissioner LaForce.
Maybe one more. One, is there a reason, maybe this is the parks that do it, but are we somewhere counting pedestrians and bicyclists in places like Brettazen and the promenade and around Centennial Lakes? I mean, people are using those as, if you're going through the Southdale area, I mean, if you have a choice, you're going north and south, you'd probably do the promenade and then through Centennial Lakes, which it seems like besides recreation, it might just be people going from point A to point B. But we don't have any of those kind of counts in here, and I'm wondering why not.
I would actually defer that one to Mr. Nolan for that.
We had talked about it at one point, counting pedestrians and bikes out there, but for the reasons we've discussed tonight, we didn't get there. So, again, we could certainly add that to the mix next year and consider that as in the future. It would have been good to get counts this year and we can do it next year, looking at Namau Creek when that happens, because those connections along the promenade could be made directly to that trail as well. So that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I like the idea of balancing. If the every other year counts that we completed this year were more focused on kind of school locations, it'd be nice to maybe offset that in the next year with maybe locations that where there's a lot of just traffic because of the destination. So France Avenue or the library, Grandview area, so we can get a clear sort of snapshot of all the places, all the different kinds of destinations in the city, and that's where we're primarily putting our infrastructure resources into improvements, or in kind of those major hub areas, and I'd be interested in tracking that over time.
Sorry, I got to say one more thing.
Yeah. And then I'm going to move us on.
Yes. So something that Commissioner Genevieve mentioned too is that how do we know, that the numbers couldn't be much better if the if people were more inclined to walk there if it was safer. So we need to figure out some kind of a way to say that this street with, the school there should have this many people walking. And that's the goal. And if that many people are not walking in your analysis, then we got to do something about it. I want some kind of a goal to be set, and then you're trending towards that goal, and you're doing some improvements to get to that goal. Otherwise, it just seems kind of abstract. I don't know.
Go ahead. I just wondered how that would relate to the Safe Routes to Schools plan. I mean, I'm assuming that there's something that would link these two ideas together.
Well, if I think back to the Active Routes to School plan, we asked the consultant who put that together to specifically focus in on kind of the catchment area. So within the walking zone, or the circular area around the school where kids either aren't provided busing or it's close enough where it would be reasonable to expect them to walk. How many kids live in that area? What would we expect the opportunity to be? And I think a parallel argument could be made for places in the city, throughout the city, where there are destinations. I think what we heard in the video from the researcher at the U was that you expect more people to walk and bike in places where there are destinations, in the same way that that's where you expect vehicle traffic. If people who are driving want to get there, I think it's safe for us to assume that people are going to need to get there by bike or foot as well. To identify a target number, I mean, that's an interesting idea. I think it could be challenging, but again, I kind of come back to what is the principle that we're working under, and that is that we need to meet needs, no matter the user. And if we expect trips to be made via all modes, then we need to make sure that there are improvements in that area, and the data should bear that out. But that's just my opinion. Okay. Moving on, thank you so much for coming and sharing this data with us, and we'll be looking forward to hearing it in future years. Okay. Now we will move on to item C, roadway reconstruction survey content and methodology. And this is an item for information and discussion for us. If Mr. Nolan, you want to kick us off with anything or do any intro, or if we should just kind of open it up for discussion here.
Well, I think you can essentially open it up for discussion. We just wanted to provide you with the information, much of which the Commission asked for last month, in terms of some of the raw data that went into the data that was presented in December, and then also what we're looking for regarding the questionnaire for the 2015 projects, to be able to provide that for you as well. And you, again, as it says in the report, it's an ETC work plan item, and wanted to get it on the agenda for February in order to have some effect on the upcoming questionnaires.
Great. I think maybe where I might start is asking Commissioner LaForce and Commissioner Iyer. I don't know if you have any thoughts. You guys got together and chatted about this very subject, and if there's any kind of overarching thoughts that you've done a little more in-depth thinking about this than maybe the rest of us.
So here's what we did, and I'll just pass out a little summarizing sheet just to kind of ground us. What we wanted to do is to start off with just the item on the work plan says review and recommend modifications to roadway reconstruction project survey content methodology, and our goal tonight was really to come back to the Commission with, what do we think that means, and what kind of initiative might this be? And so I summarized the task as really to look at the data collection process at various points and, first of all, have some understanding of what are we doing, offer any feedback we have about whether or not we think that's working or not, and then finally, if we, think there's some recommendations that we can offer, we would offer those. So then the question was, what are the data points? And this is where I really want the Commission's opinion as to sort of what's the scope of the potential project, because I see 5. And it's sort of as I think it was an interesting point that illustrates this. I don't know if any of you saw this, I guess last week's Sun Current, there was a letter in there, and somebody was basically commenting about this process. The letter was, a low participation rate. You're drawing conclusions about what residents want or don't want, and your data is sort of insignificant or doesn't really, it doesn't really tell the story. Now, interestingly, if you go to the online version, there was another commenter who had a counterpoint that thought the information was being collected in a fair way. So, I think we keep hearing this over and over. So, the kind of the 5 points that I'd like to propose would be the first one. I think there's a sort of an ongoing collection and analysis of that sort of answers the big questions as a whole. Like, as a city, do we value some of these pedestrian and bicycle facilities? As a city, what would be our opinions about things like lowering speed limits? There's got to be some process that just sort of gives us this overall kind of where we start setting policy based on that, and there's a data collection process that informs that. So that's one. And then as we start getting a little bit more specific, as specific projects start coming up, and that's what we see tonight, lots of surveys about, we're kind of thinking about coming into your neighborhood, we've got a project, and we start gathering opinions. And the point, I think, is to sort of inform the design process. So we think we're coming to your neighborhood, we think this is sort of the things we're going to do, and how do we gather information from the neighborhood, and even the question of what defines the neighborhood is probably part of this, about what we should do. So that's number 2. The third one, and we see this, we've seen this before, as the thing is being designed and implemented, there's got to be some methodology for, asking the residents who are watching this go on, is it going well or not, so we can make adjustments midstream. The fourth would be immediately following the project, and I think we see that's what a lot of these surveys were, kind of like sort of how did it go? Did you get what you thought you were going to get? Did you how did they perform? That's sort of I suppose the first crack at did we do a good job? But one other that I would add, and I think Surya has probably made this point a couple times, and I'm not so sure we do, but if there, you got to think besides the roads just cracking apart or something, when we start thinking about facilities, hopefully we have some goals for why are we putting this in the first place. Let's say, for example, we're putting in sidewalks because we want to make it safer for pedestrians to walk in that neighborhood, and we also think that will probably increase the number of people walking in that particular neighborhood. Well, there should be a point that we go back and we assess, well, first of all, we need the goal, and then we go back later on, maybe over, a year or two, and say, to what degree do we have an impact on the goal? So that's what we came with tonight, and I guess the question for the commission is the scope too broad? Should we narrow it? Does this seem sort of like when we go back to the item on the work plan, is this sort of what we think we had in mind, or we could kind of put in place in terms of what we start to pursue from here on out? So I will open it up for questions and comments then from everybody else.
Commissioner Janovy?
The one thing that I think is really critical before the next round of projects rolls around is revising the survey, which is in my pile here somewhere. But the one that says, do you have a sump pump? Do you have underground utilities? Do you think you need a sidewalk? Because some of these questions, in my experience, have set up expectations that have then caused dissatisfaction or conflict that we really don't need. And so the survey, I think, if you're going to ask a question and get, people are going to spend the time to give their information, it should be very purposeful. And the data that can come from that question and the person who's answering should be useful. There should be a reason to use that data. And so, to me, the survey really needs to be done, but I also see it as part of a bigger issue with data collection prior to when people are contacted about their road, what I find in some projects, especially the ones that are more involved, is that pretty basic information just starts trickling out through the process. And really, if it had been gathered and provided up front, and people knew what kind of street they're living on, the specific width, the specific depth of the right-of-way, some of these things that keep coming up, you could have an entirely different kind of discussion. You could have a much more informed discussion and productive discussion. So I really like the idea of looking at what kind of information should be provided to residents before they're asked to fill out a survey, along with revising the survey to make sure that we're asking the questions. Basically, if people are going to give their input, let's use it. So let's ask the right kinds of questions that will yield useful data. And then I think what we would have is a much better feasibility study, because if you think about it, the council sees the project after a very general feasibility study, and they order it, and they don't see it again. They see the bid, they approve the bid, but they never see the final plans. And so if there's a change to, or the final design, rarely, it's not part of the regular process. So, we sometimes make changes to a feasibility study. We recommend changes. The council sometimes changes it. They never see how that all works. And going to what Tom went through, are people getting what they want? Well, they have to know what they're getting before they can know if they're getting what they want, if that makes sense. It shouldn't be when the concrete's out there that they figure out, oh, you mean we're getting that sidewalk? That's an exaggeration, but I think people understand.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make a maybe friendly amendment to something that you've said? I like the idea of really thinking about what information needs to be provided to people before the survey is sent out. And you mentioned like specs of the street. What's the width? What's the right of way? And we've talked about these things in the past. I feel like I think the city collects lots of data, and ultimately, so the data informs. It's one element of how council makes decisions. It's not the only element. And I think that sometimes there can be confusion or frustration because residents might have the perception that what's put down in this survey and the way the numbers tally up at the end is how decisions are going to be made, and that's not the case. And it makes me feel like we need to do a really good job of articulating what are all of the pieces that inform and drive decision making, and to be really clear about that so that no one is confused. I don't think that hurts. I think that helps. So that's my friendly amendment to what you said, because it's not just, so people get so that, we use the information that we get. Yes, we use that information, but that's one piece of what drives decision making. There are policy elements that drive decision making. There are cost constraints that drive decision making. There are standards that drive decision making. There are all kinds of things that inform our decisions, and I think we need to be really clear about that in the methodology.
Can I follow up?
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. And so prior to them receiving the survey, they would get not only specs about their street, but relevant information about sidewalks, living streets, if they live on an MSA street, what the requirements that might come into it, so that they're well informed, and so that's all up front. So it's no surprise to them when they come to the public meetings.
And I would add that a lot of that data, maybe not all of it, or not data, a lot of those pieces, those elements, while they should be delivered in advance of a street reconstruction project, a lot of that is universal across the city. and should be also included on every city communications vehicle so that it's easy to access for folks. Commissioner Iyer?
Great comments. The one thing I worry about is that information overload. We who have been in this commission, especially some of us here, have a lot of expertise and understand some of the details. Some of us have less expertise. I think that it is always a good thing to expect that we are going to provide a lot of information to the citizens who are going to be impacted by projects. But then are we talking about giving them 100 pages of specs on the road? And I mean, what I'd like to suggest, maybe this is something the city should do, is maybe create very simple kind of business process flowchart of what we do. Just simple questions like, why are we doing the survey? And what do we want to get out of this survey? Some of the basic things, right? Just inform the residents why we're doing the survey, what do we want to get out of this survey, and then how we're going to use the survey. And what else are we going to use to make the final decision? There are really 4 big important things, right? Mm-hmm. And then, provide all that information maybe in a website location for a project. A project has a specific website location, and that has a huge amount of information there, which people who are interested can go and look. And people who are, people are impacted by the project probably are interested. Some of them are going to go look at that. So something like that, a business process of how the city makes decisions. And I've been a volunteer for the city for some years now. I personally don't really understand the business process of how decisions are made. So I think we need that. Thank you.
I think that would aid transparency, and that's always a good thing for residents. I wanted to make another I really appreciate the work that Commissioner LaForce and Commissioner Iyer, you put into thinking about this, the different points at which we collect data. And I want to ask, and maybe I want to maybe challenge a little bit the first item on here, the ongoing collection analysis of data related to global needs within the city. I think it's important to identify it, but I want to say that I think the scope for the Transportation Commission really starts at step 2. I think that's kind of what we bit off. It's really important, though, that to acknowledge that sort of that data collection that happens more at a community level through our quality of life survey and through Speak Up Edina and those pieces also will inform decision making, I think, on something as close to home as a road reconstruction project. But I'm not sure that that's within the scope of what we can tackle on our work plan. So I guess I just wanted to throw that out there and see if others wanted to chime in on that. But I feel like we can really, work to make some recommendations related to, at least within this work plan.
So what based on the comments so far, I'm hearing most of the energy is actually, I agree, not on 1, and probably not even on 3 through 5. Most of the energy is really focused on, you've been talking about item 2, which is the pre-project, how do we get residents informed about what's going to happen in their street? How do we collect their opinions about what's going to happen on their street? And so, that's one of my goals tonight, was to try to understand what the scope should be. And so at the moment, I'm interpreting, let's hone in kind of on number 2.
Although I think a couple folks have said now that if we are going to collect data at other points, that we make sure that we're using that data. Otherwise, what's the point in reaching out to, or that it's informing our decision making going forward. And I would say, just in looking at some of the reconstruction, the post-reconstruction surveys, which is mostly what we had in our packet tonight, I think it would be useful to know if there's a process in place by which, we evaluate this data and then use it for improvement of, projects, delivery of projects in the future, and whether that, how we, a lot of what I read in these surveys was people had really good experience with, their primary, like their city staff person, and maybe less so with some of the contractors on the job. And I just wonder how much that actually influences, who we select for contractors in the future, or are we really just making decisions based on who comes in with the lowest bid?
Well, the other thing I was struck on as I was looking through those, just generally how low participation rate there was too. And so you look at these things and you say, well, I want to be able to use this data, but when, 5 people basically responded, it's like, how useful is how useful is that?
I try to focus in on the ones where there was more than, more
well,
than
and there
a
was
dozen
one.
people
There was
or
one
something.
project in here. I think it was like the Lake Edina, where it had a much higher participation rate. And one of the questions I was wondering is like, what happened there? So why did the participation rate, like quadruple from where these other projects were? There might be something to learn from that.
Commissioner Spanky?
Tom, back to your point about number 2, 3, or 4, I think, based on what's in the work plan, you're probably right that we really want to jump in and look at that survey number 2, especially now to get it out for the spring. But I think it's important for us to think about 3 and 4 because it can inform what we put in that pre-construction survey. And if we want to have touch points either during the project and or after to make it this fluid process so it's helpful at any point during the project. So maybe we don't dive into those other surveys right away. Maybe that's in a future work plan. But I think we should think of it kind of system-wide. And I also agree that your whole global view is really important. And if we keep 1 and 5 here, I think it's acknowledging that this is part of the whole data gathering. This isn't part of our scope, but we should keep it all into consideration, and we're really focusing on the other 2. But I wouldn't eliminate it from the product that you've created. I think this is really helpful.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Commissioner Nelson.
Yeah, I guess my concern is, what Commissioner LaForce brought up is that we do these for each project we're looking at, and typically if we get 10%, that's a lot, 10% participation. And if we start looking at collecting data at 4 or 5 different points along the way, I guess we need to have better buy-in into the surveys to get better information out of them. And I don't know how we look at something, how do we get better participation? We can't force people to do it, but are these available online? It looks like we usually see the paper results, but are they? I think they're mailed to everybody, and they're, I don't know if they're available online too. But I guess part of what we should look at is how do we get better participation. My comment.
They are, the surveys are usually posted on SurveyMonkey, and then we also offer the option of mailing a paper copy to those who don't have access to a computer.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Iyer?
Thank you. First, I got to say Mr. LaForce, or Commissioner LaForce is the one who put most of the effort, so thank you.
We consulted.
I'm going, yeah, we consulted.
On a stair-stepping machine at the Y.
I do want to add to the commentary here is that my order of priority, if I was going to put an order of priority on these 5, 2 obviously seems like the consensus is going to be the highest priority. I think 4 is typically done just to gauge immediate satisfaction. I think 5 is very important, and actually 5 really eliminates 1. And goes back to Commissioner Janowi's comment that surveys need to be purposeful and that we need to collect information that is going to be useful. And so at some point in the future, after a project is done, let's say a year, people really kind of know if this thing was good for their neighborhood, for themselves, and they can have very useful feedback for the city in terms of what was done, the contractors, were they nice, not nice, they left a whole bunch of junk there, whatever, all these kind of things. So 5 really informs and gives that, purposeful information back to the city and really eliminates one. You don't need to do one if you do 5, because you get, this sidewalk was put in. I was not sure whether it was going to be useful, not useful, but now it's been in front of my house for a year, and wow, I like this thing. Or no, I still hate it, or whatever, right? So then it becomes a specific, it's a judgment, or it's not just speculation. It then becomes real. And so I would put priority on 5 that the city should try and do number 5. I would say 3 during design and implementation. After I thought about it a little bit more, that just could add a whole bunch of cost and create a whole bunch of confusion. So I'm not so sure we should keep 3 in this list. But 2, 4, 5 would be my order of priority, and that's what I think cities should do. We could focus more on giving input on 2, but the city should do 2, 4, and 5.
Could I interrupt 1 second? Do you have any extra copies that perhaps we could see?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
We did. Okay.
Commissioner Nelson.
I was just going to add, I think number 1 is really, what does the city think, and the city as a whole, as a universe.
I think we're talking about a representative sample there. It's a different level of data collection than what happens on a neighborhood project.
Right, and
Yeah.
what do we think about speed limits? Do we want to enact speed limits to 25 miles an hour or 20 in certain areas? Or are bike lanes important to anybody in the city? Or do we want sidewalks? How do you feel about this general thing? And then number 5 is really specific to the project, and how did, looking again at, hopefully we have some data before, and then we can look at the after, and did it matter? Did doing that project help? I mean, obviously, I hope it helped the road where the PCI was a 0, that maybe now it's a 90 plus at least. I hope it helped some things, but did it help with the sidewalk? Did it help with the health of the residents in that general area over a 2 to 5 year period or something like that? So I think it's more specific. The first one's more broad across the city, and where do we want to go? Where do we want to see it? And that's kind of where we're going with the Living Streets process, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about, so what might be next steps for us in terms of, taking another look at this and, really hitting this item in our work plan to review and recommend modifications. What kind of timeline are we on if we think we might be able to make some recommendations around modifying for this upcoming survey?
For the 2015 project, I'd say we probably will be sending out the questionnaire in May, or maybe even a little bit sooner.
Okay. It sounds like there is consensus that number 2, which is data collected prior to a specific project to inform the design process, sounds like we have consensus that feels like it's really within the scope of what's on our work plan, and something that we could make some recommendations on based on what we have heard over time. So do we want to take some time to kind of walk through that now? Should we do that offline? I'm interested in hearing from folks at what point we, want to spend the time to do this and have some discussion. We can maybe have some broad discussion now. And go ahead.
I would recommend that some work gets done offline before coming back, because we could spend hours wordsmithing the survey.
Yeah. I'd like to avoid wordsmithing in this moment. If folks have any sort of global observations about the survey in general, without kind of digging into specific questions, maybe you could offer that up now. And then I don't know if we have a group of folks that would be willing to meet and kind of do that hard wordsmithing work, or even just making sort of higher level recommendations about how to modify, and then leaving the rest up to staff. I'm open, but
so first, I would say, I don't think it's our job, and I'm not sure staff would appreciate us writing the survey. I think it's our job to come back with the observations and the feedback that says kind of like, what, here's the problem with asking this kind of thing. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? But ultimately, it's kind of staff's responsibility to put this out. So all we're really in a position to do, I think, is to provide the feedback. And we should have some sort of consensus. I mean, if you're providing feedback that says turn right and I'm saying turn left, somehow we should work that out so we can kind of talk with one voice about this. But we could say, okay, ETC thinks that this isn't working here and it is working here, and you should kind of go in this direction or that direction, then let them sort it out. I mean, that's my opinion, but I'd be open to hearing what other folks think.
An opinion of, I create a lot of these for transportation projects and where I work, and it's people look at these and go, this is the same thing last time, why bother? Can we add another pre-task maybe of creating that buzz and buy-in while whoever is revising the survey of, let's do an article in the paper to create, here's why we need your data, here's what we do with it, something to create that buy-in to get more people, and before we send it out, how do you get it and how could you participate? I heard a lot of people saying the website doesn't work, I couldn't come to the meetings to participate or whatever. Then we need to hear how more people can respond. That was my only thing, is a pre-step.
Okay. I do not disagree with what Commissioner LaForce has said about not actually writing questions, although I do think it would be useful exercise to take a look at, and actually I would ask Mr. Nolan, have we ever kind of sent out feelers to ask how these surveys look in other communities and comparable communities to see if we could sort of borrow from others who might have done thinking about this?
We haven't done that.
Okay.
That's certainly something we could do through our contacts with neighboring communities. So.
Okay. I think that might be helpful. Maybe what we could do now is just have some sort of higher level conversation about elements that we feel like are missing or could be an opportunity through these pre-project surveys, keeping in mind that the people that complete these surveys, they do this probably once. I mean, unless they move multiple times within Edina in a lifetime of living here, they probably do this once. And this is maybe one of the only opportunities that folks have to provide the city with specific information or specific feedback about their very most local and immediate concerns about their neighborhood. Some folks have the opportunity to do that through neighborhood organizations, or what's the word I'm looking for? Neighborhood associations, yes. But this is a very concrete example of, when residents get to give the city information about how their street, how their neighborhood is functioning for them. So just I can start us off, and I feel like there is a little bit of a missed opportunity here. I know this is a very functional questionnaire, right? We're gathering information so that we know what's there and we know if we're going to damage something when we go in. But I feel like there is kind of a missed opportunity to start out by asking folks a question of, kind of gather information about quality of life issues. Like overall, how is your street working for you? Here are the various areas in which a street supports quality of life. Environmental issues and obviously mobility and health, and there are lots of different things. This is from this that we gain from this public infrastructure. How's this working for you? For me, this is a major project that happens in someone's neighborhood, and it should help to support their quality of life. So that's my big observation about it.
So the survey right now, it asks for different kinds of information. Like you said, some of it's just very functional information. Do you have utility, like a pet containment system? And I can see why staff needs to know that, because you have to plan for that. But then it's entirely a different kind of information. Do you feel a need for sidewalks? Do you feel a need for streetlights? And yet, prior to that point, we're not really giving them a lot of information about those things. And so that's why I think it's so important to give information up front. And I think we have to think very carefully about asking for only opinion. Opinion's important, but also I think a resident offers a great deal of value if they can say, you know, on the corner the water doesn't drain, you know, or even something that's, I don't feel safe walking at night because my street's really dark. You know, that's not so much opinion, yes or no to a sidewalk. It's telling us they're reporting something about their environment. And there's a great deal of value in that because they're there 24/7, you know. So I think that's why it's so important to think about how to phrase the questions and how to bring out as much information that can actually be used. And so one thought I had is I would really like to know from staff what would be helpful, because they're so involved in the process. Mm-hmm. What would be helpful, and would there be an opportunity maybe to have a little subcommittee here, meet with a couple of staff members and talk through this survey, and as an immediate next step? Would that be an option?
That's something we could consider. I could speak with staff about that in terms of finding out where we're at right now with the process, and yeah, we can consider that. I don't think I can give an answer right now, but we can get back to you quickly with that.
Well, I mean, the concern is that, you know, if this is going to go out in April, May, and you're going to make any changes to the immediate survey for this year, you know, we're going to have to do something here in February, early March at the very latest, to give you time to do that. So, you know, I think let's pursue that and see if we can, and then get together with I guess tonight we choose a small group that might be willing to get together with staff and talk through the survey, I guess.
Okay, so it sounds like there's some interest among commission members to meet offline and kind of talk through possible recommendations for modifying the survey. Is there any other comments that folks want to offer about, before we close out on this and move on?
Right, at the general level that you had talked about before, going off of Commissioner Janevie's recommendation, I think the more we can explain how the data will be used, it's really important. You can look at the drainage problems or the underground utilities and just say up front, these are things we want to be aware of so that when we go and dig up the yard, we don't pull up your pet containment system. So it's helping us on the engineering side. Then there are things like streetlights or sidewalks that we want to know your opinion. It may or may not influence, and we're at a stage where we can make decisions. Things that have come up here before with the sidewalks, I think we need to inform them, this is a sidewalk in the plan. We're going to do it. But if there are opportunities to add more sidewalks, let's see if they want it. So it's really, if you ask the question, there's going to be expectations, just what was said before. If everybody says, I don't want a sidewalk, but we know we're putting it in anyway, then we shouldn't ask that question. So framing, I think, is really important, and then maybe how you lay it out and how you put things in different sections. So it's the formatting is almost, in my mind, as important as the questions themselves. So if I'm not part of that small group, that was just some of my ideas to share with the small group.
Well, I think asking the question, and like in the past, we said, do you want a sidewalk? It's going to cost you, another $5,000. Well, that's telling people to say, no, I really don't want a sidewalk, unless I really, really want a sidewalk, And then even this, the drainage service connection questions. Would you be willing to connect your sump pump to a city drain if provided at your own cost? Well, if it's in a really poor drainage area, there may be a reason to do it for the neighborhood, and just would you be willing to do something like that? And not necessarily say you're going to get stuck with it or not, but is this something you'd be interested in? And I'm just pulling that question out because it's at the top of the survey, but really to look at the survey and understand what you're hoping to get out, and really trying to get a true response, really without regard to some of the other, maybe the costs or regard. Is it something you want? Do you want sidewalks because you believe the city should be should put sidewalks in to have a healthier community in the end? Or I think there's a lot of things we can look at in this survey to ask the questions perhaps a little bit in a different way, to not necessarily elicit the response we're looking for, but to elicit a true response from the residents.
Yeah, I think, we have to be cautious also that, we're not asking leading questions. I understand why they're asked in the way that they are, because it's staff's job to gather the information and not assert value. But it's hard because, even if you asked a question about safety, like we talked about safety earlier, do you feel safe walking in your neighborhood? People could interpret that many different ways. There are lots of different ways to interpret a question about safety. So this is a challenge. This is challenging. I don't want to minimize the work that has, been done in the past and make it seem like this is a simple thing. But I do think there are a number of things that we've identified that could help to improve the receipt of this and how folks feel about it after the fact. I had one other thing I wanted to. Oh, yeah, I think the same thing came up for me with streetlights. Even just thinking about, when people are asked a question about streetlights, I think most often they think about themselves. You think about, are there adequate streetlights on my street when I'm driving? I mean, I think normally people, and you have another form of lighting your street when you're in a car, you have headlights. But if you ask people the same question, is there adequate lighting in your street when you're walking at night, they might answer it differently. And so these are all things that, in service to the policy direction that's been set by council, we need to think about whether this is really giving us the information that we need.
So I just wanted to add to that comment, saying that I think we should stay away from creating surveys, because I think, at least I can speak for myself, I'm not the expert on creating surveys. Most surveys I've taken have numeric values on them. You can pick from 1 to 10, and they have some kind of, rules and other things to them. So one thing I'd like to maybe request is that maybe it's too late for the 2015 calendar year, but for 2016, maybe you can get a consultant. And I think Chair Bass mentioned asking other communities how they do their surveys. Might be something that we should consider, both of these things, for the 2016 calendar year. And this year, maybe we do whatever we can with our subcommittee, trying to come up with some recommendations for staff.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that, there are different reasons to conduct surveys. And, sometimes you get a survey and you complete it because it's part of a part of research, and so that instrument has been validated, and, it's got scales on it that are, well established in literature and all of that. And that's not the reason we do the survey. We do the survey to inform, quality of life improvements for our residents. But I do think, though, if there's not time to kind of take a look at, well, what's the standard of practice among other neighboring communities, that's something that I'm interested. I think we could, if we can't get that done this year, maybe that's something we could send out feelers and gather some information about for next year, perhaps. But.
Well, I'm sorry, Commissioner, one correction. This is for the 2016 project.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But the survey that's going to be going out this year for the following year's projects. Yes. Okay.
One or two other general comments. Like, for example, where there's opinions, this survey assumes there's one person answering it who represents the household.
Right.
I know whenever I've gotten political surveys in the mail, and there's only like one place to check, and there's only one for the whole household. Well, it's like, well, who's going to answer this? Who's going to answer this question? And I think the same thing probably applies here as well. The other question I have is, Mark, who's got like ownership of this thing? I mean, because maybe we get some understanding. What would be helpful? What would they want to know from us? We can just start shooting, our opinion around about this or that. But I mean, who owns this thing anyway? And how do we? Maybe that person would have some. We could be more helpful. If that person, if we heard from what that person might need from us, or what, how to format our comments or our feedback.
Do you have a response to that? And who owns it? Are you referring to who organizes it? Who pulls it all together?
Yeah. I mean, because one thing we could do. I mean, do you want? Earlier, 20 minutes ago, I said we should probably speak with one voice, and now I'm sitting here thinking, well, one way we could do this is everyone could just look at it, throw in there, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. It'd be a big mass of feedback from 8 or 10 people or whatever it is, and the person would have that. Chair Bass is not liking that.
I'm pondering that.
She's giving me the look.
No, I'm pondering. Commissioner Janevi has a response.
That's why I think it would be valuable to meet with staff to understand what they hope to get out of the survey and how it's working and how it's not working, because it might not be working or it might be working really well. And I think we should ask that. Mm-hmm. And if we could do that by next month, then I think we could have a recommendation that is already thoughtful of what we heard from staff in March. And then that would give 1 month or so to 1 or 2 months to staff to decide how to process that information and review the survey. So I think we have time. And I guess my other question is that we have a subcommittee already, and we can add to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so let's do this. Is it safe to assume that Commissioner LaForce and Commissioner Iyer would continue to be willing to, depending on what our answer is about, having some sort of subsequent sit down with staff to hear what's working for them and what's not, that you might be willing to do that, and or meet again and kind of collect some general recommendations based on what we've talked about here, and maybe offer a few other recommendations about the pre-reconstruction survey. Would you be willing to continue to?
Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Is anyone else interested in joining our two emissaries on this? Okay, Commissioner Jen. So you now are volunteering.
Yes, I now volunteer.
Let it be noted on the minutes. Okay, anyone else that wants to join? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Iyer.
And I think, I've heard from the commissioners on both sides of me here that even if you're not part of this committee, that you can just mark up a generic survey like this and provide feedback, like you suggested.
Well, and what I would think we would do if we do meet with staff is, again, my opinion would be that the person or people who drive this process should drive the improvement of the process too, rather than us just throwing feedback. I'd rather have them say, I think what we're saying at this point is this thing, there's some opportunities to make this better. Mm-hmm. We would like to provide some feedback. Mm-hmm. Pull it out of us. You own it. You own it. So pull it out of us. How would you like us to deliver the feedback? What process would you like to use? And then we go from there.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yep. That sounds great. Okay. So we will await communication from Mr. Nolan, maybe let's say within the next week. Oh, yeah. Okay. And based on that communication, then we can decide whether it's, whether to schedule a meeting, the three of you, or meet with staff and then some subsequent iteration of meetings. Okay, great. Everybody comfortable with it? Yay. We are moving on. Thank you, everyone, for your discussion and your thoughtful comments on that. That was a meaty thing, and it's something we've talked about for a long time, so I really appreciate you just kind of like jumping in and us figuring this out. Okay, more conversation to be had. All right, let's go to, we tabled D, and we're going to E, the Traffic Safety Committee report. And that is for action. Are there any questions about any items on the Traffic Safety Committee report?
Do you want to just start with A?
Sure.
A, I only have one thing, and that is I wonder if in excuse me, A1, in the recommendation part, it says staff will advise the requester to bring to the City Council a resolution. And I wonder if petition might be a clearer word.
That should be petition.
Yeah, so that was my only comment in section A. Oh, I lied. I mean, I lie. I made a mistake. I do have another one. Is that okay? A4. So A4 is the one where the resident would like to have the area in front of their steps kept clear, and I was not clear what was meant by blocked by disabled vehicles. Does that mean that somebody has broken vehicles parked on the street?
That was the implication, yes. The vehicles that were no longer working were being parked or abandoned in front of her steps.
So I would imagine that's against code. I mean, I don't know about Edina, but
it is, but the resident also stated there are oftentimes other vehicles that are parked there too. So.
Okay. My other question on that is that this is so close to the intersection that I have no idea how close it is, but I mean, they can't park within 20 feet of the crosswalk anyway. So is this an enforcement issue is my first question, because the steps seem very close to the intersection. And then the other thing, what is the policy for posting handicap parking zones?
We don't have a policy. It's something that this has come up 2 times since I've been here, and it really just depends on the resident and the situation. So we don't have anything written. It's just a decision, recommendations made by the committee on a case-by-case basis.
So would it be sort of a no parking, like a handicapped only sign?
There are 2 options, and we're contacting the resident to find out which would work best for them. One is handicapped only parking, which we have done before. I think about a year and a half ago we did that at one location, and another option is no parking, a loading zone parking situation.
Okay. Anything else on A? Okay, let's go to B. Are there any questions on section B? I actually had a question on B1. It says that after review, staff noted that the volume and timing of the light at Cahill were larger detriments to the area than right turns on red at Cecilia. Is anything going to be done about looking at the timing of the light at Cahill?
Staff had a discussion about this today, and the light at Cahill is going to be retimed for an extra 15 seconds. So staff is working to retime that. We're working with the city of Bloomington as well, because there are signals that need to be coordinated with Bloomington on that stretch. So we're working with engineering staff at Bloomington to retime the lights and then observe the results.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on B?
It appears I had just a comment on B2 at the last line there. Layout of the approach has one through lane. I believe that's supposed to be instead of land.
Okay, let's go to C. Any questions about C? First, C or D?
Yeah, I I'm sorry.
Uh-huh,
I
go
did.
ahead.
So C1 is up by the high school, and so, and Anna, maybe you know, but I know that sometimes the exit, there's somebody there directing traffic. So that would, if that's happening, that would affect any kind of gap study, because there's a guy directing traffic, and it's all go or all stop. And then the other thing that just my feeling is that is such an uncomfortable place to cross, that that's one reason I think maybe there won't be very many people crossing. And so I don't know if that traditional kind of way of looking at it is going to help with the analysis that much. The other thing is that if the school district, if the community adopts the referendum and there are changes up at that campus, then I hope that there's an opportunity to look at traffic in conjunction with that. So would this be something to wait on? I know it's in C already, but.
Staff to discuss waiting a little bit longer on this one, and the use of the non-traditional way of looking at things is a good use. So we talked about, if it met the gap requirements for a flashing beacon, would we want to use something like that? And the answer is it doesn't really work when you've got a crossing guard. You can't, it's not something that works. So we need to think a little bit further on this.
I have a comment on that same item, C1, just in regards to the flow of traffic in that area. That exit that's shown just to the right of that circle is an inward, that's all inbound traffic. There's very large do not enter signs coming out onto Valley View there. However, I've seen buses being directed out that way, and at all times of day other than right at peak, there's often vehicles exiting that way too. So I know it's private property or it's school property or whatever, but it seems odd to have a very large do not enter sign and having people just drive right by it. I thought maybe I'd just ask the students if they, or Anna, if she knows that, how you feel about that too.
Yeah, I mean, people don't use it during the school day, or when we're like going in and out of school. People don't really go out of the do not enter, but definitely like during random hours, people do that.
But there's a group of buses that come out from EPAC during exiting of school that go out that way, and I just think that's, whether it's a school district thing to look at or what, but concerns me. Just you're blatantly, going against the, and when there aren't guards there, directing you to do that, I guess. So.
Okay, anything else in the Traffic Safety Committee report? And if not, then, oh, you do. Okay, go ahead. Commissioner Jamie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be
That's
really
all right.
fast.
No, don't apologize.
C2, I've brought up before. I agree with whoever brought this forward and said that that the crosswalk as it is doesn't meet city policy. So, I've crossed in that crosswalk before, and it's kind of, wherever you have two lanes of traffic that you have to negotiate, and like the one lane stops but the other one doesn't, it's scary, and there's no pedestrian landing that's in line with the crosswalk. So
it also has a very high rate. I mean, just statistically, that design has a high rate of pedestrian injuries and fatalities because of the stopping, and then one car stops, but the second lane of traffic continues.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there's a traffic signal.
Not that
far
place
away.
in particular. I'm just saying generally.
Yeah, in general, it's one of the less safe things. Yeah, there's a traffic signal, and I think there is posted no pedestrians just out here at Grange Road and 50th. But I mean, having the pedestrians cross this signal would seem safer than this randomly placed crossing. But that would have to be studied. And then on D, this D was kind of just a question about when people are referred to the county because they have a question about timing lights. At what point does the city decide to go to the county about retiming lights, if that makes sense.
Are you speaking in general terms? If we
Yeah,
get enough,
in
we get enough
general.
requests, then when do we? I'm not sure I can answer that. I mean, I know we are in contact with them quite a bit. And is this the item on?
It's D. There are a couple of them.
Yeah. I guess it's a case by case basis. So I mean, I know we've talked, and on France Avenue is one area that I know we're still talking about the timing of the lights out there.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to recommend the Traffic Safety Committee report for approval?
Yeah, with comments, and there are a couple of just word changes that were minor.
Okay. So you move that?
I move that.
Great. It's been motioned and seconded. And all in favor of approving the traffic safety or recommending the Traffic Safety Committee report with comments and edits, aye? Aye. Nay? Okay, motion carries. Okay, now we are on to updates. Anything from Anna, from our student member?
Nothing since last month because school hasn't really been open very long. So.
Okay, all right, great, thanks. Becky Edina.
Just we're talking about our focus for this year, and we had our discussion. The three main areas of interest are bike parking, evaluation of existing on-road facilities, and sort of increasing our presence at community events or supporting an open streets type event. So then within each of those categories, we'll try to pick something that we really can focus on, a task that we really can do to make some progress.
Great. Thank you. Living Streets?
Living Streets, we met last Wednesday, I believe it was. Is that correct? And our plan is to go forward with the is to go out to the public and really bring our plan, our draft plan, to the public in a couple of public hearings over the next few weeks. Are those dates still good?
They are, and just to be precise, we're not talking about public hearings, we're talking about public meetings.
The public meetings,
right,
I'm sorry,
right.
yeah.
So those meetings have been set, and I know it's going to be in the paper next week, and we're going to start doing some outreach for Wednesday, February 4th at 7 p.m. at the Public Works building, and then Saturday, February 7th at 10 o'clock at the Senior Center. We had a discussion with those advisory group members that were there just about the goals and how many meetings to have, and this really came from the group, and it was decided to have two separate meetings. It's not based on geography, it's just based on the ability to reach people, and we thought that two meetings would work. And again, just as a reminder, we are planning on doing a Living Streets Plan update on the next ETC meeting as well, so we could talk about what we heard at these public meetings. But the ideas that were expressed at the meetings were, one, to educate people about what the Living Streets policy is, and then get some feedback and opinions from folks about some of the draft plan elements. And the idea was that members of the advisory group would be doing much of the presenting and talking, and we'd also could possibly ask some of the Living Streets champions to attend meetings as well to be able to be on hand. So these meetings, while staff will be present, the idea was to have the members of the advisory group play a pretty big role in how the meetings are facilitated.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
That's all. Yep,
Okay.
just to publicize those two dates again, February 4th at 7 o'clock at Public Works, and February 7th at 10 a.m. is a Saturday at the Edina Senior Center.
Okay, thank you. Update from Walk Edina Working Group.
We had our first meeting, and there was great turnout and a lot of interest, which was really exciting to see that people really care about walkability in Edina. I was really excited to get everybody's input, and we mostly got to know each other had a big discussion, talked about, what people's concerns were. Just kind of wanted to hear what their experiences were out there walking. We only met for an hour, so we didn't have a lot of time. So next time we're going to talk more about expectations, purpose, goals, that sort of thing. And we had 2 new applications that I'd like to recommend, Kobe LaVenture and Andrea Bender. Both of them applied online and came to the first Waukee meeting to make sure they wanted to be part of the group. And I feel very fortunate to have them apply and want to participate because they both had a lot of great ideas and are avid walkers. So I'd like to move to recommend them to be 2 new members of Waukee. Okay.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? I do just want to ask during this discussion time, what does that bring you to, bring the working group to in terms of numbers?
So it will be, with the 2 new members, it will be 8 regular members plus 3 student members, and then there are 2 other prospective members. One who has applied, but I haven't had a chance to interview that person by phone, so I'm going to wait until I have a chance to do that. And then someone else who has just been a guest and is still sort of just getting a feel for the group and seeing if it's something that he'd like to do.
Okay. So I would say that at 11 members, you're probably reaching the upper boundaries of being able to really effectively facilitate a group conversation. So just, take that note of caution.
Okay. Yeah, and we did close down the application on the website for that reason, because it's a big group.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of ideas, so we want to make sure everybody feels heard. So that's a good suggestion.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or discussion on that? All right. So all in favor of approving the 2 members?
Kobe LaVenture and Andrea Bender.
And yes, for Waukee Working Group. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay? Okay, motion carries. So we have 2 additional members. Congrats. Okay, and Communications Committee?
We didn't meet, but I guess one question I would have, I think last time we had talked, or I had asked a question about the multimodal education plan, and we were going to bring that back, I thought this month, but where is that at right now?
We had several items that the ETC has suggested for tonight, and then also staff, given the holidays, we lost a couple of weeks, so we're moving that to February.
Yeah. Okay, good, thank you. That's all I have.
Great. We're on to correspondence and petitions, and we did not have any in our packet this month, so we'll move on to Chair and Commission member comments.
I am going to hand out
the
item that was sent
today from the
mayor.
Okay. Okay. Great, thanks. I think I will maybe start at this end with Commissioner Whited. Any comments?
I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me my 3 years of term to provide my input on this group. It's been a pleasure, as this is my last meeting.
Thank you so much for your service, Commissioner Whited.
I wanted to see if this is something that I'm not sure is collected. The data that I'm looking for is when we do vehicle counts, if we look at the size of the vehicles, are there large trucks versus cars? Is that information collected?
We're able to count large trucks, the multi-axle trucks, but that's it's either that or vehicles. That's the counts we're able to get.
And has that been shared with this group before? Have you, like for specific streets?
Not to my knowledge, in terms of the truck traffic. I'll have to talk with Coordinator Totten about that and find out how reliable the data is, because he's able, when he studies the data, he's able to determine, where the quirks are in the numbers and how reliable that data is. But if you wish to see that,
Maybe not yet, but let me just kind of go through my train of thought. The reason I'm asking is there any studies, transportation studies that have determined the impact of large multi-axle truck type of vehicles compared to cars in terms of damage to roads? And then the third piece of this is the different kinds of streets in Edina neighborhoods. Are they all constructed to the same specs, or are some that are expected to have more heavy traffic constructed to different specs? So it's just some general questions about, are we looking at damage caused to roads by large vehicles?
I would assume that there are studies out there that do address that issue. In terms of street design, we do have differing pavement depths for instance, France Avenue. Portions of that street are reconstructed. I believe, and I would have to defer to the engineers on this, that the depths of those streets are going to be, the pavement's going to be deeper than what we see on our residential streets. The exact numbers I can't give you right now.
Certain weight causes?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
but I've never looked for them, so that doesn't mean they're not out there.
Okay. I will just briefly comment that this article that Mr. Nolan just handed out speaks directly to Vision Zero, the Vision Zero initiative, and the issue of holding safety is paramount on our streets. So interesting that, well, I think it's just part of the public discourse right now. So, and then I'll pass it on to Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments, and I think these have been brought up before, but as the France Avenue improvements have been done and are in the process of being done, and we're doing some more things out there this spring with plantings and whatnot, I'm just a little concerned about the crosswalks we added out there, that people don't typically know where to stop. You see the impressions in the road where you feel the sensors are, and those are across the crosswalk. But I think what sensors are being used now are called video sensors or something like that. So the proper place to stop is actually behind the side, the crosswalk. And I don't know if stop markings have been discussed of being put in or not. I think we just need a little more public education on where to stop, because if somebody stops in the middle of the crosswalk, it kind of defeats the purpose of the crosswalk. Or if they're in front of the crosswalk, there's cars in front and behind the crosswalk, it just confuses the entire purpose of the project. So somehow either public information, more information out there, education, and or stop lines. I know we approved the proper crosswalk marking, the zebra stripe, but it just seems like we need to, as spring approaches anyway, someday, that we train people to do the right thing and stop in the right places.
Staff is still open to some of those measures. I know we've been talking to the county, or did talk to the county a couple of months back about signing stop here on red. The county is not supportive of that, of having additional signage. However, that won't keep staff from keeping that conversation going. And also the commission will see, as part of the street safety education campaign, that's something that's been added in terms of addressing, telling folks where you're supposed to stop. Obviously, you stop prior to a crosswalk anywhere, which is the
right.
law. So that will be part of that campaign. So we can touch that further maybe next month.
Okay, good, thank you.
And I might just add to that. I mean, even say you're approaching France from Hazeltine or Hazleton or whatever it is, and with the intention of turning right on red. Well, when you stop behind the crosswalk, you can't see around Byerly's to know if it's all right to go. So then you end up having to pull up to make that right turn, and then as you look, you might find traffic, which then you're stuck sitting in the middle of the crosswalk. I mean, and at which point there could be some pedestrian coming around the little brick wall that you can't see that person either. So there is a lot of confusion around that. in addition to just if you're going to go straight through, I mean, the right thing is the problem as well.
And then the only other thing I wanted to mention, and I brought this up prior to the construction, is that the lanes, we were narrowing the lanes throughout France through those several blocks, 10 block, 11 block area, that ideally the lanes wouldn't shift back and forth between where they were getting narrower and wider. And I don't know if that's really the case, but certainly there's a weave to those lanes now, and it's, especially today or when the roads are wet, it's difficult to see those lines, and people revert back to following as was discussed during this time, with the markings, the expansion joints on the road, which do not follow. They used to follow the lines, but now they don't. So I think we're inviting some more, potential accidents in that area due to that. And I don't know if, again, it's a county road. I don't know if there's been an increased number of accidents through there because of those lane shifts or not, but it's just a concern I have. That's all I have.
Commissioner Becky?
I just really liked the way Mr. Waljasper said that safer streets are a gift to the children of Edina. I thought that was a really neat thing that he said, and I really think it's true. And I think with especially on the sidewalks for the active routes to school, I think from now on I'm just going to think of it that way. I mean, I always kind of did, but I liked how he said that. So that's my only comment.
Thanks, Mr. LaForce.
Yeah, I've got maybe a comment / question about our advisory communication from last month, and trying to as I watched what happened, we got it done in time to get to the council, and then in the meeting, staff said it was from the ETC, and that really should have more time to evaluate that. And so I was surprised because I didn't, it sounds like it's still in the works. Do you know, Mark, where that is and what we might expect will come back from staff on that?
Yeah, staff is putting together some cost estimates that would be associated with making those revisions, with redesigning the roadway, moving it slightly to the south, and looking at what types of impacts in terms of costs. And they're coming back to council with those numbers next month.
Next month?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Commissioner LaForce?
No.
No. Commissioner Janovi?
The Wooddale request to experiment, has the final report been submitted?
The consultant just got us the final report late last week, and I'm still reviewing it, and hasn't been submitted to the state yet, but we do have it.
Okay, great. And then, speaking of advisory communications, the one that we did maybe a couple months ago or so on municipal parking facilities, that was given to the council, but there was no discussion. And I should have brought this up during my Bike Edina report, but working on bike parking, that's kind of an important thing to know if if we put racks at parks, the kids can access them, through the parking lot. So is there any process for bringing things onto the agenda so that the council actually considers them?
I'll look into that. I know typically the practice is to put the advisory communications under the correspondence. I keep wanting to say communications. Thank you. Correspondence section, and for instance, the EEC had, I think, 4 advisory communications that are going on their next meeting. So, and that's typically where it goes. I will look into finding out what process there might be about getting something like that on the agenda, given that it does come from the commission and not from staff. I'll look into that. Get back to you. Okay.
Can I comment on that quickly? Yeah. Is it possible that the council allocates a few minutes of the meetings for maybe a reading of that advisory note from commissions? And we're probably not the only ones who are sending it. Other commissions are probably sending them some too, right?
Yeah, there are other boards and commissions do submit advisory communications.
So I mean, maybe we should be asking council to allocate 3 minutes per commission. So one of the commission members could just come up at city council meeting and read that.
You know, the other thing is that there are advisory communications that we're just communicating information. But then we have some that we're asking for a specific action. We're asking them to please take this up and consider it. And my memory is that the municipal parking facilities one was that kind of thing. We were asking for a code modification or recommending it, and asking that it be considered. So, you know, when that happens, I guess I would just like a clearer process, because if we're putting the time into it, and we have to go to the council, if it's just in their packet, I think it doesn't really, I don't know. I think it has to be an agenda item, and then they always have the option of getting to that point on the agenda and saying, you know, table it indefinitely. You know, they don't have to talk about something, but at least it's on the agenda, and they will have given it some consideration before the meeting and may choose to talk about it.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Commissioner Rummel?
I just really liked Mr. Waldasper's presentation, and the Safer Streets kind of promote like walking and more relaxed modes of transportation, which gets more people out on the street and creates a greater sense of community.
Thank you. All right, good. It's nice to have fresh perspectives once in a while. All right, we are moving on to staff comments.
Yeah, just have a couple. You can recall last month we discussed the Cornelia Drive sidewalk, that we were submitting an application for a Safe Routes to School grant from the state, and that application was submitted and received on the 9th. And as part of that process, we got a resolution of support from City Council and also a letter of support from the school district. And staff is still looking at doing some further design. Council had some comments regarding the project at their last meeting, looking at potentially what would happen if the sidewalk were on the east side, and we were looking at a current recommendation on the west side and perhaps on both sides south of Dunbarry, between 70th and Dunbarry. So staff is still looking at this, but no further design will happen until February and March. Staff right now is focused on getting out the street reconstruction projects, getting those ready for this year, and then at that point we will start meeting with residents that are specifically impacted with potential tree impacts, et cetera. So the project is still moving forward, but we won't hear back about the grant until March. However, we do have enough in the PAC's budget to pay for this project if the bids come in where we expect them to. And then one thing that allows us to, waiting until February or March, it allows us to see where the bids are coming in at, so we have an idea about what the project can cost. Some other miscellaneous items. Commissioner Janovi a while back had sent me an email talking about the bicycle lane ordinance. In the city, the state allows us to designate bicycle routes that have bike lanes on them in the city. And so on February 3rd, staff will be submitting an ordinance revision adding Olinger Boulevard to that list. So that will be coming up in front of council on February 3rd. And I spoke with Chair Bass earlier, and I did communicate with Commissioner Janovi. We have on the schedule for, as you recall, the ETC and all boards and commissions are required to have a work session with council, and that work session has been scheduled for June 16th. We wanted to grab a time because that's the earliest available time that we were able to get, and the proposal is to have the ETC for an hour and then Bike Edina follow them up for an additional hour. We did this last year, but there was also something else on the agenda, so we were kind of cramped for time, so at least this way we have committed 1 hour to each group on the 16th, and that way there's a transportation theme to that work session. That's all I have. It does, yes, 5 o'clock.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. With that, we are adjourned.
These meetings normally start at 6 o'clock, so I'm not sure